Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Club webinar on what feels like a very serious morning. It's the obviously the morning after the first day of the national lockdown, and a time when all of our leadership probably moves into yet another mode of operation. It therefore feels very timely to be doing a session on crisis leadership, and we're very fortunate to have with us a gentleman called Simon Ash. Simon's a serving officer in the British Army, and also a management coach and leader in civilian life as well. He's currently a reservist, reservist officer in the British Army. Simon will tell you a lot more about himself than I am now, but he's served in a number of theatres of conflict and with the British Army over the last 3 decades, and now brings that learning into his work in charities and third sector organisations. Simon works with Social Minds as an associate as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Simon. My role is just going to be to organise the conversation. Just a couple of things to do with how we do this. Simon's going to start and talk for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to invite contributions. There's a little method for doing that, for raising your hand, and Joe will be watching those. When you make your contributions, if you keep them to about a minute, anything longer than that, and it's just a little bit harder for everybody else. And I want to give everybody a chance to either ask questions or contribute as they wish. We're going to run from 10 till 11, and then I'll do some summing up at 11 o'clock, and then we can all get back to our day. So without further ado, I'd just like to hand over to Simon, and good morning, welcome, and thank you for joining us on what is for you a very busy day. Simon, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, thanks so much for inviting me to be part of the workshop and the call this morning. I hope I'll be able to share some things which will be of useful and will provoke a good conversation. So I'll speak for a few minutes. I've got a few notes that we can go through, and once I've actually turned those notes into a more legible style, I'll try and share those around for people afterwards as well. And I was thinking about the question about leading in crisis and how we prepare ourselves and others, and just sort of reflecting back on some of my stories. And so I'll try and bring out a few of those as we go along. And of course, the first image that came to mind is the classic British, be calm, stay calm and carry on. So I was thinking, okay, well, what are some of the things that we can be as leaders in a time of crisis? So I've got sort of 10 headings. We'll see how many we get through of those before my time is up, and I'll share a few tips and stories along the way. And some of it's quite obvious, but I want this sort of be as a reminder and also as an encouragement to people. And the first thing is literally that, to be the best leader that you can be in the situation. Because I think times of crisis really show the need for leadership, and there, I mean, the differential between leadership and management. As you get away from the sort of the day-to-day steady state, at a time of crisis and rapid and severe change, that's when leadership is really needed. I actually first learned that lesson before I actually joined the military. I was actually climbing in the Alps with some friends. And there were 2 pairs, my friend and I, and there was another pair that we were climbing with, and they had been leading the whole day for several hours. And we came to the top of the climb, and as we topped out at the top of the mountain, a thunderstorm hit, and we were right in the middle of it, to the extent where we were seeing sort of lightning strikes on summits around us. And the pair that were leading, they effectively froze, and they didn't know what to do. And so suddenly that situation, we're realizing, okay, well, now is the time to step up and come up with a simple plan to get us all safely down the mountain as quickly as possible. So what's the so what of that? I guess within teams, and particularly in times of crisis, being a leader is not just a position, It's a role that we can step up into. And I think within our particular organizations, we may have positions of leadership, and it's definitely a time for us to step up. But I think there's also an encouragement across the team for lots of people to step up, especially as it's very likely that some of us will be taken out of the fight, so to speak, for a time, making sure to be able to empower the team and the leaders around us. And I think even when we're sort of feeling helpless and sometimes out of our depth, we can start small with what we can do in leadership terms. And one of my favorite sort of quotes is from Churchill, talking in the First World War when he was in the trenches. And you're sort of talking about just the need for a leadership to smile, and saying, if you can't smile, grin, and if you can't grin, get out of the way until you can. And sometimes just those little things can actually really change the environment in which we lead it. Which leads kind of onto the second point, which is be the calm. And it's not just be calm, I think it is be the calm, because we can set the environment and atmosphere through our own actions and approach. So even that simple thing of just taking a little bit more time, managing ourselves, just preparing ourselves before we're going in and out of meetings, so that we can exude calm even when we may not necessarily be feeling it inside. And just watching the tone of our voice and how we interact with people to set that, because fear and panic is very much infectious, as we're seeing around us with the COVID outbreak. And I think the run on toilet rolls is that classic example of how panic and psychology can be undermined, and therefore setting out and living out the best behaviors can have a huge effect on your team and your whole organization. And it gives us a chance to step back as well if we are in that calm position. Mentioned earlier, I started off in bomb disposal. One of the first operational tours I did was in Bosnia. And as well as being a bomb disposal officer, I was commanding something called the incident response team. So if there was a crisis or an incident at that stage, I had a team of medics, people from the fire service, signalers, all sorts, to be able to respond to any incident. And it was actually Christmas Day, and I had a knock at the door, and someone was there trying to search me. They were covered in blood, and there was someone who had been brought in with a gunshot wound into the medical facility. I went down to the medical facility. There was lots of interest on the casualty, trying to keep this person stable and alive, and that was not my expertise. I couldn't help with that. But standing back, I was thinking, okay, well, what next? What do we need to do next? And I was thinking about, okay, what are the questions I need to ask? And the first thing I was able to ask is, well, has anyone told the helicopter crews? Because we weren't going to be able to look after this person in the long term where we were. And that ability just to remain some calm, be able to step back a little bit and ask the right questions at the right time is really key. Next thing, be the strategist. So I'm sure we're all doing a lot of planning at the moment, but having that overarching strategy, and what I mean by strategy is that the coherent approach to overcoming a challenge is very important, because there's a lot of detail that flows out of that, but you've got to have that overarching strategy and know what it is for you and your organization. I mean, the government approach is not a bad example of having just some clear phases or steps. So the whole idea of contain, delay, research, mitigate. It's easy to communicate, and as I say, there's a lot of detail that sits below that, but just knowing that headline for those your key approach, and finding a way to think through that in a coherent and systematic way. So in the military, there are lots of decision-making processes and planning processes to go through some of that, to come out with the strategy and the plan. And that can be very helpful for getting everyone involved in the thinking, but doing that at the same time. And I can certainly share some links to examples of that kind of process if that would be helpful to people. But I think that again leads on to the fourth thing, which is then be flexible, because there's an old military adage which is no plan survives contact with the enemy. In other words, the situation changes. General Patton said the importance is in the planning, not the plan. So it's really good to have all of that thinking, to have the overarching strategy, there's also the expectation that the detail will change. And I think today is a classic case in point. I've certainly just been on and off the phone for the past hour or so, updating our plans and expectations and direction off the back of the direction from the government last night. So yeah, planning, fantastic, have a plan, but remain flexible because the situation will change. And then within that, as a leader, we've all got to be decision makers. Again, very obvious, but what does that mean? And I say, I've been taught a lot of decision-making processes, but in my experience over the years, I've come to see that one of the most important things in decision-making is being really clear of your values as an individual and your values as an organization. Because whether you are doing systematic decision-making, very sort of logical thought, or it's subconscious, you can trace back your behaviors and actions and decisions to the values that you hold. And now is actually a really good time to sort of see and test whether your values hold true. So the values that we espouse as an organization or as individually, are your behaviors actually linking up to those values? And if not, is that a problem in behavior, or is that actually a problem in terms of the stated values that you hold? And those values are important because in terms of planning principles and encouraging others, particularly within the team, and delegating authority down, they need to be aware of those values and what those actually mean. So being able to express values as a verb is very important, because we often as organizations say, okay, what are your values? Well, it'll be integrity. But it's then very good to sort of say, well, what does that actually mean? Well, that's doing the right thing. So what is the behavior? What's the action which is linked to that value? And then how does that work out, and how does it affect the thinking and planning that you're doing at the moment? Which again links on to the next thing, be a delegator. With a fast moving situation, it's very quick to get overwhelmed. And with the amount of information, it's very hard to be the single point of focus for all decision making, all planning and everything else. And so delegation is massively important. And you won't be able to give all of the detail that people need. So coming back to the values and putting out principles for people and being clear in terms of what you can give in direction is very important. Whether it's tools like smart tasks, the whole idea, I'm sure many people use that sort of framework in terms of specific, measurable, attainable, and time measured tasks in terms of how we delegate to things, and just being very clear of that. Authority at each level is very important. In the military, this is called mission command. The whole idea of, if you specify the mission to those in your team, if you can give them the vision, the end state, and give them any specific constraints, then within that they can work out their own plan for achieving that end. Next one, be a communicator. The need for communication goes up in a time of crisis. I think there is both the people want more direction, there is that need when people are feeling anxious, and because the situation is changing, people need more information. But I don't know about you, one thing I've found in this situation is there is a huge amount of information, almost too much information. And again, therefore, it's also really important to be clear and cut that down to the most important messages that you need to get down to people at any given time. And with that as well, there may be times when there's not much more that you can say, but I think communicating even when you don't have much more to say is also important as a thing of reassurance. So, explaining that you're waiting for more information, or there's nothing you can do at this time, or whatever else it might be, that regular communication is very, very important. Next thing, be open to opportunity. Sometimes it may sound counterintuitive or potentially even crass, but there is always opportunity in a crisis. And even if you think back to like doing a SWOT analysis, you're looking at external factors, opportunity and threats are the sort of mirror image of one another. And in every time of threat or crisis, there are opportunities that will fall out of that. I mean, even just forcing different ways of working creates opportunities within teams. So just be open to that. Say it forces innovation and lessons. And I think that's the next thing in terms of being open, being reflective. So making sure that we're learning the lessons as we go along. So we have to keep our decision making cycles going and learn quickly. And I think during the crisis that we're going to be able to learn our lessons on our feet, so to speak. I think afterwards there'll be a longer time for reflection, and that is an opportunity to capture those lessons and implement changes within ourselves, within our organisation. And then finally, because I know I'm coming to the end of my time, be resilient. And I mean that at a personal level and at an organisational level. And often as leaders, we can feel so much pressure, we can sometimes forget to look after ourselves. And my encouragement is, everyone at this time needs to make sure that they are having enough sleep, that they are eating well, that they're getting exercise and managing their energy levels. And I always like to think of myself as having a dashboard where I'm sort of looking at all of these and other factors to make sure that I've got the energy, I've got the mental capacity, and I'm well in myself and in my mind to bring the best me on any given day to my team. And there are ways of developing further resilience into organizations, and I'm sure we can do some more discussion on that. And there are sort of training and bits and pieces, but in some ways, at the time of a crisis, it's hard to actually build resilience beyond thinking about, okay, well, how now, even if we haven't had a chance to build much resilience beforehand, what can we do in terms of creating reserve capacity within an organization right now? Again, another military truism is always have a reserve, whether that's people, resources, finances, always have a reserve. I think that's probably enough from me. I've been speaking one way at all of you for the last 10, 15 minutes. So I will now open the floor and let Craig manage questions and things coming in.
Simon, thank you, and a really compelling and powerful 10 points there, and delivered in 15 minutes, so that's incredible. So great efficiency as well. Thank you very much.